thin-stemmed goblets. These are fun to turn. These particular ones are about 1/8 of an inch thick. A lot of guys will make them a lot thinner. I intend to do some a little thinner myself eventually. Today I'm going to show you how to do this, but I'm not going to try to get this thin. The reason being, putting this on camera, the work that I put into it, that's when I'm sure I'm going to fail and it's going to break. So I'm going to stay somewhere around 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch. And I'm really not trying to show you how to make them thin, I just want to show you the technique so you can carry on from there. If you're a new turner, they're not really that difficult, but you will want to do a lot of practice, get your technique down. Tool control is really important. So sit back and relax and let's take a look at these. I have an 8-inch long piece of a limb here. I cannot remember what type of tree this is off, I'm afraid. The pith is well off center on both ends and running down the same side. That's important because I want to make a thin stem, and if the pith is in the center or running across, it'll likely break. I'm going to use a scratch awl to put a divot in the center of the limb on each end. Then I'm going to put it between centers, turn a tenon on this end, put it in a chuck, and then we'll take it from there. First thing I'm going to do is round this end so that I can put a tenon on it. I'm using my spindle gouge, a 3/8 spindle gouge, and then I will use my skew chisel to make the tenon. This could be interesting with these big splits on the side here. Just see what I can do. Now I'll just see how that will fit into a chuck. I'm going to use my 3/8 inch bowl gouge to start shaping the outside of the bowl. I'm going to drill a hole to start the goblet. I'm using a 5/8 inch standard steel bit. I have tape marking 3/4 of an inch from the widest end of the drill bit. I'm not using a Forstner bit because I don't want a flat bottom. I'm going to turn this at 250 RPM to drill. I have put a pencil mark around here at 3/4 of an inch from the end, just to remind me where the wide part of the hole is. I don't want to get too narrow at that point when I turn the outside. Now I'm going to try shaping the inside of the bowl using my Easy Wood finishing scraper. And I'm going to have to put my finger on the outside to support it a bit because this is held not that well in that chuck. I'm turning it at 2000 RPM. This is shaking pretty badly. I'm going to need to fabricate some kind of a steady rest for this. So I'm going to just take this down enough to make it straight so I can put some kind of string steady rest or something around it. I took some time to make a string steady rest to hold this. Since I put this aside and did the string steady rest, this wood is warped a little bit, so I will have to true up both the outside and the inside again. And that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to use my 3/8 spindle gouge on the outside and my Easy Wood finisher on the inside. I'm going to be turning this at 1000 RPM, which might be fast enough to cause friction to want to burn the string off. I'm going to use a suggestion Al Furtado gave me, and I waxed the wood and the string. We'll see if that makes any difference. I made a video on how to build this string rest. If you care to see it, I'll have a link down below in the description box so you can take a look at it. Well, that answers that question. The heat burned the string off. I wasn't terribly worried about getting a friction burn mark on the outside because that's going to be made a little thinner there anyway. I was going to take it off. But I guess I'm going to have to restring it and slow it down to 500 because that's a little too much. See how that works. I've slowed the lathe down to 500 RPM. Now I'm going to try this again and see if it works without burning the string. I've sanded this area now to 400 and I think it looks beautiful. I've moved the string steady rest out of the way now and I've put a 1-inch styrofoam ball, the kind you can get in any craft store, on the end of my live center, and I'm going to use that to keep it steady. I'm going to start turning away some of the bulk with my spindle roughing gouge, and then I'll work with my spindle gouge and my skew chisels. I don't want to end up getting this too thin. If I do, it's bound to break. So I'm going to start working from the right and just do a little bit at a time, getting it down thin and working in very small sections. Very time consuming, but otherwise I'm sure I'd snap it off. Feeling like it's time to sharpen some of my tools a bit. When turning with a skew chisel, particularly when I'm turning something very thin, and that'll get thinner as we go along, I don't use the middle of the blade. I use just the heel, just the very point of the heel. Puts a lot less pressure on the wood. When you're using the middle of the blade, just a slight lean of too much weight can break thin parts. I'm going to take a few minutes now and sand up to this point. I don't want to let it get too long because just the touch of the sandpaper on there, if it gets thin enough, could break it off. One of the really stressful parts about it is that if you get this too thin, and I'm not trying to make it as thin as I can, just the torque of the lathe starting up with any pressure in here at all can actually snap it off. I've had it happen, but of course it was a lot thinner than this. So I'll sand this and then I'll be right back. Now with this much sanded to 400 grit, I'm going to carry on turning a little further up the stem. You've probably noticed by now that I tend to switch off between using the spindle gouge and the skew chisel. And that's because either one of them is quite proficient at doing this job, and I just like to practice with both of them. And I consider pretty much any cut I make a practice cut. I've had to totally mute the sound of the turning. That little styrofoam ball between the metal of the live center and the wood of the turning has started to send up a real high-pitched screaming. I want to get rid of that. I'm going to turn this off and sand this part. It's a tricky balance between showing this fast enough to not bore you and yet slow enough to show all the details. Let me know if you think I'm going too fast or too slow. Now I'm going to go back to what I consider the final shaping tool in this area, that being sandpaper, of course. The only people I know who think that real turners don't use sandpaper are people who don't turn.
Now, with that sanding finished, more turning.
Now I'm getting to the point that's making me nervous. This is going to be very difficult to part off cleanly because of the cracks and the large voids here. I'm going to use my skew chisel to define a line and then part off on the headstock side of that line. This could be where you get to watch me fail something. If I was to keep going now and this was to fail, it would do so in a spectacular fashion. I'm sure there'd be pieces all over the place. So I'm going to cut this off with a saw, clean up underneath there with a carving chisel, and then I'll show you the final result. And that's my technique for turning a thin-stemmed goblet. It's the first time I've done it with the natural edge on here like that, with that split, the void that was in it. I kind of like it. I haven't put any finish on this yet, still deciding what to do, probably just coat it with mineral oil. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. One day you can get down to turning these, maybe even thinner. I hope to do so myself. So thanks for dropping in. Have yourselves a great day in your shop. Remember to be safe. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.